Reading 32 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teachings of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, Volume 1. Birdlip, January 25, 1942. The Law of Three. Part 1. To what ultimate principles, to what fundamental laws can the universe and all its manifestations and processes be reduced? According to the teaching of this work, there are behind all things two ultimate laws, called respectively the Law of Three and the Law of Seven. These two laws are fundamental. From the standpoint of this teaching, the universe is created. We live in firstly a created and secondly an ordered universe. If the universe were chaos, there would be no order and no laws. Cosmos literally means order, as distinct from chaos. If the world were chaos, the study of the laws of matter and so on would be impossible. Science could not exist. The law of three is the law of the three forces of creation. This law states that three forces must enter into every manifestation. But creation is governed by another law, the law of seven, or the law of order of manifestation. Creative forces could not work unless they created in some order, and this order of manifestation, or order of creation, is due to the law of seven. But at present we have to speak only of the law of three. Every manifestation in the universe is a result of the combination of three forces. These forces are called active force, passive force, and neutralizing force. Active force is called first force. Passive force is called second force. Neutralizing force is called third force. First force can be defined as initiating force. Second force as force of resistance or reaction. And third force as balancing or relating principle or connecting force or point of application. These three forces are found both in nature and in man. Throughout the universe, on every plane, these three forces are at work. They are the creative forces. Nothing is produced without the conjunction of these three forces. The conjunction of these three forces constitutes a triad. One triad creates another triad, both in the vertical scale and in the horizontal scale of time. In time, what we call the chain of events is a chain of triads. Every manifestation, every creation results from the meeting together of these three forces: active, passive, and neutralizing. Active force, or first force, cannot create anything by itself. Passive force, or second force, cannot create anything by itself. Neutralizing, or third force, cannot create anything by itself. Nor can any two of the three forces produce a manifestation. It is necessary that all the three forces meet together for any manifestation or creation to take place. This can be represented in this way. Diagrams. The three forces are only creative at the point of their conjunction, and here a manifestation, a creation, an event takes place, but not otherwise. Out of all the infinite number of things that could happen, only a few actually take place, namely when these three forces meet in conjunction. If they do not all meet, then nothing can take place. For example, if active force and passive force meet, nothing can happen. no event will take place. But if neutralizing force appears, then there will be three forces at work and something will take place. A triad will be present. That is, a triad composed of the three forces. And wherever the three forces meet in conjunction as a triad, a manifestation must result. Every triad, every conjunction of three forces can give rise to another triad. And under right conditions, a chain of triads results. It is always from the neutralizing force. That is, the third force, that a new triad springs. In the next triad, the neutralizing force of the prior triad becomes active or passive force. We will speak another time of this. The neutralizing force, or third force, in a triad brings the active force and the passive force into relationship. It connects them together somewhat in the same way as the fulcrum brings the two sides of a balance into relation. Without the neutralizing force, the active and passive forces would cancel each other out because they are opposed to one another. They are opposites. A connecting or relating force is necessary. Neutralizing force is intermediary between active and passive forces. When the right neutralizing force is present, an active and a passive force no longer oppose one another uselessly, but are brought into a working relationship that creates a manifestation. For example, a machine can be sometimes regarded as neutralizing force. A rough example is a windmill. The active or originating force is the wind. The passive or resisting force is the building. The turning sails make a relation between the pressure of the wind and the resistance of the building, and a manifestation takes place. If there are no sails, or if the building collapses, or if there is no wind, there is no manifestation. This is only a very rough illustration. The idea of three forces is found in religion, in the conception of the Trinity. In science, the idea of different forces exists, as in positive and negative electrical charges, of which matter is ultimately composed. But in science, the idea of a third or relating force is not yet distinct. The fact that three forces create means that three wills create. The first order of creation is therefore subject to three wills or three laws, and it follows that subsequent orders of creation, proceeding from the first order, are under more and more laws. The three forces are said to proceed from unity. This unity is termed the absolute, which means that which is not conditioned or limited in any way, and so under no laws save its own will. Since three forces are necessary for any manifestation, the absolute is unmanifest or uncreate. The absolute is beyond all human thought. Creation proceeds vertically downwards into increasing density of laws, and further away from the absolute. As we shall see in the ray of creation, the earth comes at a very low level in the vertical scale of the universe. Part 2. Change in the quality of the neutralizing force will not only alter the relation of forces in a triad, but may reverse the active and passive forces. When life is neutralizing force, personality is active in a man, and essence is passive. When the work is neutralizing force, the position is reversed, namely essence, or the real part, becomes active, and personality, or the acquired part, passive. In this case, we have to consider again the significance of the vertical and horizontal lines of the cross. We can conceive the neutralizing force of life acting all along the horizontal line, and the neutralizing force of the work entering at every moment from the vertical direction, and only felt when a man ceases to identify with the things of time and remembers himself. Let us now speak of the three forces in their psychological aspect. The study of the three forces begins with the study of them in oneself. As was said, three forces exist in nature and in man. It is very difficult to see the three forces. They must be studied at first psychologically, that is, as they exist in oneself, by means of self-observation. Active force or first force can be taken as what one wants. Passive force or second force can be taken as what resists or prevents what one wants. This is as far as one must go to begin with. It is impossible to see third force until one sees first force and second force. The second force, or force of resistance, exists in everything. That is, to what we want, there is inevitably a force of resistance. If people realize this, they will not blame so much as they do, nor will they feel that their difficulties are unique. I will speak briefly of one or 2 points in connection with the study of the three forces on the psychological side. In making aim, second force must be calculated, otherwise the aim will be unpractical. If you make an aim, you must count the cost of keeping it. When you do so, you will probably make your aim more practical. Aim must not be too difficult. Everything that prevents you from keeping your aim is second force, provided you wish to keep your aim. Let us suppose you make an artificial temporary aim that you will not sit down all day. Then you will notice second force in yourself in connection with this aim, namely, what resists you, what opposes your keeping this aim, all the different I's, the different arguments, etc. The nature of the second force will of course be determined by the nature of the first force, in this case, the aim you want to keep. Do not attempt to try to see third force. It is quite useless at first, but try to see first force and then second force. You cannot see second force unless you see first force. It is first force that makes second force appear. If you want nothing, there is no second force, insofar as your desire is concerned. People do not even know what first force is in themselves. That is, they do not know what they really want. Ask yourself sometimes, what do I want? You must be sincere in noticing what you really want. If a man pretends he wants something and really does not, his active force is what he really wants. He is lying to himself. We have spoken briefly of the law of three forces in their psychological aspect. Next time, we will begin to speak of the ray of creation in the light of the three forces of creation. That is, we will consider the law of three in its cosmological application. Part 3. Let us take the phrase already used, namely, the fact that three forces create means that three wills create. It may be asked if these three wills, which proceed from the Absolute, are identical when in conjunction with the will of the Absolute itself. This cannot be assumed, for it reverses the order of creation by making three pass into one. Three cannot pass into one, save by the will of the Absolute, and this would mean the indrawing of all creation. Notice that if you divide 3 into 1, you get a 3. You get 3 repeating to infinity. The created universe proceeds from the Absolute by reason of the three forces which no longer as such belong to the uncreate absolute. Compare the Christian cosmology, where in the Athanasian Creed it is said, "There are not three uncreate, but one uncreate." The absolute is uncreate, unmanifest, unconditioned, and this is beyond all human thought. The three forces proceeding from the absolute in the first act of creation are already conditioned, one, by the single will of the absolute, and two, by their mutual relation to one another as active, passive, and neutralizing. These forces at their primal level are all conscious, but already limited, and as their reduplication proceeds in the out-breathing or descending order of creation of all things, they become increasingly mechanical and limited the further they are in the vertical scale from the absolute. If we were to say that the sum total of the primal three forces in conjunction together made the single will of the absolute, we would imply that the primal three forces would pass into the absolute on conjunction with each other, in which case there would be no creation. Three would pass into one, but it is the will of the absolute to create, and the three forces or separate wills of creation proceed in consequence from the absolute and cannot return unless it is the will of the absolute itself to draw in all creation. The three primal forces unite to create the universe in successive stages. They do not unite to form the single will of the absolute, which is uncreate. For if their conjunction made a unity identical with the will of the absolute, there would be no creative process. On the study of three forces in oneself. Part 4. We have greater opportunities of observing ourselves than of observing the external world. We live very little in the external world, which is foreign to us. We are intermittently aware of it, but notice very little about it. We can pass the same house 1,000 times and be unable to describe it. Actually, we are far more permanent, even for ourselves, than is the world. This is one reason why the study of three forces begins with self-observation. Also, you must remember that a force is invisible, and our more direct contact with what is invisible is by means of self-observation. You must understand that in trying to study this question of forces, you are not studying things. A desire is a force, not a thing, for example. A train of thought is a force and is not a thing. An idea is a force, not a thing. One reason why we have so much difficulty in understanding three forces is that we tend to see in everything one force. We think of force as one, and in everything that happens, in any manifestation, in any event, we tend to see merely one force. We attribute it to one force. We see one action in one event. This is partly due to our inability to think of more than one thing at a time as a rule. Sometimes we think in terms of two things, but to think in terms of three things is beyond us. It is beyond formatory thought. An event, for instance, must always be good or bad, right or wrong for us. We see only one action in it, and further, we do not even think of events being due to forces. We see an apple falling from the tree and merely see the apple now lying on the ground. We see a magnet attracting or repulsing one pole of a compass. We see it all, but scarcely think of forces. In this case, obviously different kinds of forces. Nor do we notice how forces change for us. At one moment, we are attracted by a thing, and next moment repelled by the same thing. Or we are repelled, and then an idea comes to us and we feel attracted. We do not realize that the thing at one time conducts one force and at another time an opposite force. In the same way, our relationship to a person changes. That is, the person undergoes a change of sign for us. And this means that in the triad of forces that produce the relationship, there has been a change of forces. Mechanical love can turn to hate, mechanical trust to suspicion, and so on. All such ordinary manifestations in human life are due to forces and changes in these forces. I am not asking you to designate in such cases the forces, but to notice them. The three forces cannot be studied theoretically. The only practical way of studying three forces in ourselves is by doing something. By this is meant imitating or personifying in ourselves one of the three forces in relation to some other force, either one acting in ourselves or two in external events. Example 1. Struggle with habits. Struggle with suffering, struggle with ignorance, etc. 2. Struggle with expression of unpleasant emotion towards someone one mechanically dislikes. Struggle to carry out some difficult task. In this way, we can begin to realize what second force is for us in each case, and from this can begin to catch a glimpse of third force. Example, a sudden accession of force that assists one's struggle with a particular task means a change in the quality of the neutralizing force. Encouragement may have this effect. The active force in the triad is thus increased, and the task, the second force, may be more easily gone on with. On the other hand, it may weaken active force by creating the imagination that one is able to do the task, so that the task becomes active. The resisting force becomes the strongest.